What up, guys? Joachim here of Joachim Speaks in Tongues language learning channel. And today I wanted to talk about spaced repetition systems. I saw Fingham Languages this morning did a whole, it's like an hour and a half video on spaced repetition systems. He talks about Anki, Memrise. He talks about the spaced repetition systems that are integrated into other spaced repetition systems. So I'm going to assume that you, if you're watching this video, you probably know what spaced repetition systems are. But they're basically, just in very short explanation, they are learning systems that are like apps or websites that you can put information into or download information from them, and it will give you, for any topic, but specifically in this case, language learning, it will give you a word or a sentence, and then it will give it to you in another 10 minutes, and then it will give it to you until you click that you know it. And then if you come back the next day, it will give it to you in 24 hours, then in 3 days, then in, say, 7, 8, 9, 10 days, and then the period gets longer and longer. So it is spaced repetition with the idea that it moves that information into your long-term memory, that you get accustomed to using it. So that's my brief explanation of what a spaced repetition system is. So they come in very handy for learning information, especially for language learning. Now, now that I got that out of the way, just to kind of discuss some of these things, I've tried Memrise, Closemaster, I've tried Anki for periods of time, and Anki is probably the one that I've used the more consistently, I would say, probably than others. But if you're going to use something like, say, Duolingo or Glossica to learn languages, they are sentence mining, essentially. You take a sentence or a word and a group of words, and you use them in a bunch of different sentences. Now, this is different in concept than using, say, Anki or something like that, because you may not have the same word repeated over and over and over again in different contexts. And that's where I think the benefit of both Glossica and Duolingo really lie and are very helpful, is because you do see those same groupings of vocabulary in a bunch of different sentences as you go through. And in the case of Duolingo, the further you go on each crown section or each icon, it will require more and more of you and how much you output the language. So maybe first it's giving you a grouping of words, and you choose in your native language what those are. So it's giving it to you in your target language, the language that you're learning, and then you're reproducing that way. And then maybe by the time you get to the third crown, it's having you do a mixture of translating from in both directions, from the target language to your native language, and from your native language to the target language as well. And then by the fifth crown, like the last section that it has you do before you move on, or before you've completed that section at least, then you're actually having to output in both languages. So it's making you type out the responses either on the website, which is better, or on the mobile device on your phone if you're using that, which is also good, especially for, if that's the primary way that you're learning. I do find it's a lot faster, and you can go through a lot more lessons and encounter the language a lot more by using the desktop version. So that's kind of why I think it's better. But that all aside, that is different in the sentence mining feature than it would be in, say, just a rote spaced repetition system. So I think that is a better sense. And if you're using that, you're also in Glossica, say you're getting these reps. So you're getting a review of previous material, and it is using, so both Duolingo and Glossica are integrating both sentence mining and using these words in a variety of different contexts and a variety of different sentences. And they're also using spaced repetition system because it will track how often you have come across that word within a certain context or using it in a certain way. So you may see the same words in different sections, but they have like a different ending. So that's language dependent, because not all languages use endings differently. English doesn't use as many endings differently, but just to use English as an example, since we're speaking in English, this video is in English. If I say to you, the man says he is handsome. I don't know. So the word says, it has an S at the end of it. It is showing, ownership in a sense. So he says this. But that's different than to say the man said, which would be past tense. You know, in one case, it's present tense. And if he said this, then it is different. But if he says he will say, so we have said, says, and say that are all basically the same word, but they're using different formats. Well, other languages have that too. So you may come across the same word and it has a different ending. So Glossica and Duolingo will actually count that as 3 separate words, even though they're very similar. So those are all different ways that you encounter the language in things like that use sentence mining. I think Mango Languages would be another one that uses sentence mining as a way to learn languages. And I think that that is a better system than just solely using spaced repetition systems without having some kind of sentence mining integration into it. Now, obviously, you could in theory use immersion, which is what you know, like Map vs. Japan and the MIA, Missing in Action. A lot of those like immersion-based learning systems utilize. They highly promote the idea of using a spaced repetition system within using immersion. So as you immerse in a language through listening to movies, through television shows, through maybe reading books, if you've come to a point where you can read books, you start to come across sentences and short phrases that you recognize. And then you can take those phrases that you start to recognize and it's in, you're like, I've heard this hundreds of times, and now I'm going to put it into a spaced repetition system. So that is kind of also doing that because you know that you've come across that. So if you come across that word in a bunch of different contexts, then you can start taking the same phrases and sentences and integrating them into other phrases and sentences within that spaced repetition system. But you're having to create that on your own. You're having to make those out. Whereas obviously with Duolingo, it's already taken the most common 3,000 words and put it into the entirety of the course. So you really come out using those 3,000 most common words in a lot of different contexts and a lot of different sentences, I guess. So that would be a difference, and I think that is a better system. I think that gives you a better foundation much quicker, at least. But now, you know, the thing that I think people run into with Duolingo, especially less so with Glossica, Glossica I think is slightly better. I don't know that it's significantly better than Duolingo from the little bit I've used it. But where there is some differences is that with those, you build a better foundation for going into the language in the future. But people who use, like, say, Duolingo, they'll do like 1 lesson per day. So in less than 10 minutes, I think they advertise 5 minutes. If you're only spending 5 minutes per day on Duolingo, well, it's going to take you 20 years to learn a language. And then, even then, you're not going to have learned it. You're just going to have come to like a basic foundation in it. So I think really, you know, you need to be spending preferably an hour a day, I think is a good thing if you want to learn a language within, say, a few years where you're able to interact, understand, and read basic materials and get around in the language. It's going to take you, say, maybe a year, and you are going to need to spend an hour a day doing that. I think within 2 years, like, you should basically be able to, like the difference you see from going from start to your 1 year mark is going to be catastrophic because the learning curve is almost straight up. Like, you're going way up in the amount of time that you're doing. But as you get to that first year, or you build like a foundation, well, it starts to become a lot harder to see progress then because you've already kind of learned the basic things, and it's a lot more difficult to get to more abstract aspects of a language. So, you know, that is something to consider. Anyway, so those are some of my thoughts on spaced repetition and the differences between spaced repetition versus sentence mining. For building a foundation, sentence mining, I think, is the way to go. Once you get kind of past a foundational level of the language, then that's where starting to integrate solely, or things that are only spaced repetition without also having a sentence mining component to them, really becomes necessary in order to continue going forward in that language and to make sure that you remember the vocabulary that you come across. But, you know, also with that, as you get better with the languages, it actually becomes easier to remember the vocabulary, new vocabulary that you come across, because it's like the isolated word out. You come across, say, you know, a sentence of 7 words, and there's one word in it that you don't know. Well, now that word suddenly stands out really well. You really recognize it. So in that way, you come across a lot less vocabulary because you already know a lot of the vocabulary in the language. But then suddenly, with you know, being a more intermediate learner where you have a lot of recognizable vocabulary, the fewer words that you come across, well, now you do actually recognize those a little better, but you're also coming across a lot less new words. So it really becomes difficult to say, or difficult to have a strong opinion on how quick an intermediate learner gains new vocabulary that way. But it definitely is more enjoyable, I will say that. So as you become a more intermediate language learner, you actually are using the material, so it's more interesting to our minds. We interact and have more to it. So that's it. You guys take it easy, and I will talk to you in a video coming very soon. I will continue doing the Greek Duolingo story section. So I look forward to that for those of you that are learning Greek.